The day after Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan hit theaters, Paramount greenlit a third entry in the franchise, with Harve Bennett still on board to not only produce the film, but also write the script. Nicholas Meyer, who had written and directed the previous film, chose not to return, and Nimoy said he wanted to direct. The film earned back its entire operating budget on its opening weekend in June of 1984. In its initial run, it made a total domestic gross of $76.5 million, more than enough to justify the green light for Star Trek IV.
A mysterious alien probe is approaching Earth. Its motives are unknown, and it renders helpless anyone in its way. As the Earth is racked with devastating storms, and the probe saps all of mankind's energy reserves, it is up to the renegade Admiral Kirk and his crew in the stolen Klingon bird of prey to figure out what the probe wants. Unfortunately, they quickly discover that the only thing that can stop it is the humpback lost to whaling ships centuries earlier, and the only way they can find one is to go back in time to late 20th century Earth.
Before we go any further, if you could please hit that like button, it will keep this channel from going extinct. If you'd like to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe as well. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. After the success of Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, Paramount quickly greenlit Star Trek IV with the intention of releasing it in 1986, to take advantage of the 20th anniversary of the franchise. Harve Bennett was kept on as lead producer, and Leonard Nimoy was hired to direct after William Shatner, who shared a Most Favored Nations clause with Leonard Nimoy in their respective contracts, declined due to obligations with his television show T.J. Hooker. Shatner was initially reluctant to sign on at all, and for a brief while, Bennett and Nimoy considered producing a prequel set in Starfleet Academy, with young actors replacing the main cast. However, Paramount eventually came to an agreement with Shatner for an increase in pay and an assurance that he would be able to direct any potential Star Trek V, so Bennett and Nimoy scrapped the prequel idea and started coming up with plans for a continuation of the plot of Star Trek III. Bennett's first concept was a courtroom drama in which Admiral Kirk and crew are put on trial for their actions, with an added subplot involving assassination intrigue, Klingons, and even the memorable original series character Harry Mudd. This was turned into a screenplay by the writing duo of Steve Mearson and Peter Crix, but Paramount gave it a hard pass. Nimoy was keen on tackling environmental subject matter, and when word came down that the studio wanted to do time travel, Bennett and Nimoy came up with the idea of having the Enterprise crew go back in time to recover something that was lost due to mankind's negligence.
Now wait just a damn
Spock, start your computations for time warp.
Early concepts included needing a plant that had been rendered extinct by the destruction of the rainforests in order to cure a 23rd century disease, but they had a hard time making that work as it didn't present many plot obstacles and seemed a bit too grim for the light-hearted tone Nimoy was interested in. Eventually, Nimoy read up on extinct animal species and became interested in whales. Coincidentally, William Shatner, who was initially opposed to the idea of a time travel yarn, had not only done work with Greenpeace for the Save the Whales movement, but had even done a one-man play that used both whale song and the D.H. Lawrence poem Whales Weep Not, which Kirk quotes in the film.
They say the sea is cold, but the sea contains the hottest blood of all.
Mearson and Crix were again tasked with writing the script, and one mandate they were given was to include a character to be played by Eddie Murphy, whose career was on the rise after Beverly Hills Cop and who was reportedly a huge Star Trek fan. The character they wrote for him was an astrophysicist at Berkeley, but Murphy, who wanted to play an alien, passed on the idea in favor of doing the Golden Child. Bennett and Nimoy were unhappy with the script Mearson and Crix had delivered, feeling that it needed to be, quote, trekked up, unquote. Facing a time crunch, Bennett agreed to rewrite part of the script himself, namely the first and third acts, which are set in the future, and asked Star Trek II's Nicholas Meyer to come in for the rest. Meyer, whose Time After Time was another time travel movie set in San Francisco, wanted to change the setting to Paris, but for various reasons, logistical and narrative, that didn't happen. However, Meyer was able to include a scene similar to one he'd cut from Time After Time, involving a guy with a boombox. The punk music that was originally chosen for this scene wasn't very good, according to associate producer Kirk Thatcher, who also happens to play the punk, so he and a few other crew members got together and whipped up I Hate You to replace it.
And I say screw you!
Thatcher reprises his role, sort of, in a brief cameo in Spider-Man Homecoming. How much of the Mearson and Crick's script for Star Trek IV remains in the final film is a subject of some controversy, with Mearson and Crick's claiming that quite a bit of their version was retained, but with Bennett and Meyer alleging that virtually none of it was kept in place. Meyer claims to have never even read the Mearson and Crick's script, but because of Writers Guild arbitration, Mearson and Crick's were given top writing credits, above that of Bennett and Meyer. I tend to buy Mearson and Crick's version of events, but it's hard to deny that the final version of the film feels very much like a Nicholas Meyer story, with its cynical undercurrents, playful tone, and a notable lack of any on-screen violence. One subplot we know came from the Mearson and Crick's script and was eventually deleted by Nimoy involves the pregnancy of Lieutenant Saavik with Spock's child, presumably from their Pon farr ritual on the Genesis planet. Nimoy was never particularly comfortable with this subplot, which is why he ultimately removed it from the film, much to the disappointment of the actress who plays Saavik, Robin Curtis. Whatever the case, the final script, as written by Bennett and Meyer, was approved by everyone involved: Paramount, Nimoy, and even William Shatner. The rest of the cast came aboard with little trouble, and the only missing piece was the new character of Dr. Gillian Taylor, an amalgamation of the Eddie Murphy character and a television reporter from earlier scripts. While there is a persistent rumor that she was added at the insistence of William Shatner, who thought Kirk needed a love interest, Nimoy has always insisted that this is not true, that he came up with the character after watching a documentary on whales during the story's development. To play the enthusiastic cetologist, they hired Catherine Hicks, who had done quite a bit of television work, was nominated for an Emmy for playing Marilyn Monroe, and who would star in another time travel film in 1986, Peggy Sue Got Married. She knew next to nothing about Star Trek going into it, and she purposefully remained ignorant throughout production, hoping to pass on her own bewilderment to the character.
You're not exactly catching us at our best.
That much is certain.
Other notable actors include Mark Leonard and Jane Wyatt reprising their roles as Spock's parents, Majel Barrett as Christine Chapel in what was supposed to be a much bigger role, Grace Lee Whitney as Janice Rand, and Brock Peters as Admiral Cartwright, along with blink and you'll miss some cameos from Michael Berryman and the Go-Go's Jane Weedlin. Filming began in February of 1986 on a budget of $22 million, with a significant portion of the film shot on location in and around San Francisco, a rarity for Star Trek. The real-life Monterey Bay Aquarium serves as the fictitious Cetacean Institute, though there is a lot of cinematic trickery to disguise a few duplicate sets and the fact that the Monterey Bay Aquarium doesn't have any tanks even close to large enough to hold humpback whales. The aircraft carrier scenes weren't filmed on the USS Enterprise either, but rather the USS Ranger, notable for the fact that it doesn't have a nuclear reactor. Those scenes were written to take place in Golden Gate Park in the film. These scenes were actually filmed in Will Rogers Park in Los Angeles.
Everybody remember where we parked.
Much of the rest of the film was done on sets, and a water tank built into a parking lot on the Paramount backlots. The Bird of Prey interior was completely redesigned, as the set from Star Trek III had been much too small, not to mention the fact that it had been completely scrapped, and the bridge of the Saratoga was a redress of the original Enterprise set from Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Admiral, there be whales here.
Surprisingly, almost none of the whales seen in the movie are real. Industrial Light and Magic developed several models, including remote control miniatures, a full-size tail section on rails, and a full-sized front end for when Spock does his mind meld.
What the hell?
Leonard Nimoy took great joy in fielding complaints from animal rights groups, reassuring them that no humpback whales were harmed or harassed for the film. The music was put together by Nimoy's friend, Leonard Rosenman, who'd done the music for Fantastic Voyage, 1978's Lord of the Rings, and the first two Planet of the Apes sequels. Rosenman goes for more variety and energy than the previous Trek standard, and though his soundtrack is not my favorite, it's definitely memorable. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home released on November 26, 1986. It received a surprisingly warm reception from critics, who enjoyed its fun tone and applauded it for its appeal to non-Trekkies, and it earned $133 million in worldwide gross, making it one of the biggest earners of the year. Paramount would consider this the best performing Star Trek film until the J.J. Abrams reboot 2 decades later. Particularly notable was a showing in Moscow, arranged by the World Wildlife Fund. Harve Bennett remembers the screening fondly, recalling how the film got its biggest laugh from the Soviet crowd with the line,
"The bureaucratic mentality is the only constant in the universe."
As for me, I think the movie's fine. The plot is pretty silly and contrived if you stop to think about it, but if you can just roll with the premise, it's definitely an entertaining fish-out-of-water tale. You can tell the cast and crew were having a good time making it, and the underlying conservationist theme is inoffensive and appropriate. Granted, if taken too literally, it's probably the strangest conservationist message I've come across this side of John C. Lilly. We should make sure the whales survive just in case their enigmatic songs are actually interstellar communications with an alien intelligence that will one day come looking for them while unwittingly disabling everything in their path, but Nimoy's heart was definitely in the right place. Though the initial premise, an alien probe is causing havoc as it approaches the Earth, is undeniably similar to that of Star Trek the Motion Picture, this movie does try to do something different from the previous films. It is more confident than Star Trek 3, and it manages to juggle everyone in the cast more effectively. It has a fantastic arc for Spock in particular.
Forgive me, Doctor. I'm receiving a number of distress calls. I don't doubt it.
And it is nice to see some of the characters who don't usually play off of each other being put into awkward situations together. I appreciate that the movie tries to have a timely socio-political message, and I love that it isn't afraid to play off of its own absurdity. It's a Star Trek flick that doesn't mind poking a little fun at Star Trek, and it's no coincidence that this was the film William Shatner was promoting when he did his Get a Life speech on Saturday Night Live.
Get a life, will you, people? Crying out loud, it's just a TV show.
As with Star Trek 3 though, I find the direction of the narrative pretty frustrating. This movie goes out of its way to point out that there should be consequences to the events of the previous film, but in the end, those consequences amount to resetting the universe to its status quo, with everyone but Admiral Kirk escaping punishment, and Kirk's punishment being that he is now forced to do what he wanted to do all along and be the captain of the Enterprise again. It's farcically neat, and it is the last nail in the coffin of everything Meyer tried to do with these characters in Star Trek II. Granted, Meyer would eventually be able to move them forward again in Star Trek VI, but that's a story for another video. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What do you think of Star Trek IV? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you really do like these videos, please consider joining my Patreon to get early access to videos, your name in the credits, and more. My patrons vote on one movie I cover every single month. I also have a website at emcgill.com where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Until next time, when things are going to get a little weird, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.